to add value to it, and we don't meet the unless we have to open the door, which is a whole freaking conversation into itself on that end of it. But it helps provide information to that. We don't typically meet the appraiser, and if we have to open it up, we open it up. We say, "Do you have any questions? Thank you very much," and we wait until the appraiser's finished. Then we lock the home. But do you find as an appraiser, if a real estate agent leaves these packages, Wendy, out there, is that helpful to you? Or
That's a good question, because honestly, it is helpful. Oftentimes, when we get a packet, like from you or Yana or other realtors, they are so full of information that we need. We are always looking for lists of improvements. Give me a listing history. What's been going on with this property? How many offers did you get? Anything that will add to our process. When it comes to sales, those are good. We do accept sales. If it's factual information, you might say, "Here are 3 sales I know of on the street." We really appreciate that. Where we have to draw the line is when any discussion goes down the path of value, or here's what I think it might be worth, or it should come in this range. That's where we have to stop the realtor or the homeowner sometimes and say, that's something we can't discuss with you.
That's a great question. Do you like having the homeowner present or not?
It doesn't bother me at all. It's fine for them to be there. We don't often have those discussions with them. We may ask them about improvements. But if they will bring up that sort of thing, well, what do you think about, this, it might come in, or I really need this for my loan, then we have to stop them. And I've had to do that but mostly it's educating the homeowner and letting them know this is just something we can't talk about right now. Once my process is done, I'm happy to talk to you about all of that and how I came to what I did.
We got some comments coming in. Let's go to Nicholas Turpey first, CMO, Emergent Financial Services. He says, doesn't that increase the value of appraisals in the market then? Because appraisals will keep the market contained in the public market consciousness. Buyers not familiar with the market seeing sales blow by appraisals will hold off on buying and cooling the market down. Is my thinking correct? Thoughts on this topic?
Read that again. There was a lot of information there.
It was. I don't think he's necessarily right on this comment here.
I'm not sure what the question is there.
Yeah, make the question, Nick, if you can, way more succinct than that. Jamie Turner has this comment. Good morning, everyone. When determining comps to use in the appraisal calculation, what is the standard radius used? For example, if I'm performing an appraisal on property A, I will only look for comps that are X miles from that address.
No, that's a great question. There's no standard. I mean, there are standards for having to comment if you went beyond certain lengths, but the market, we should always start from the subject property and go out from there in small increments. So you may be able to establish a market within a few blocks, and sometimes you need to go 2 or 3 miles or 5 miles. So that can vary with different properties, and again, depending on how rural it is and so forth, but always staying within the best location you can is always the best answer to that.
Any thoughts on that, Scott?
No, I mean, that's the main thing. So if you look at an area in Charlottesville versus if you were to go out towards Buckingham, if someone built a $500,000 and $600,000 house in Buckingham, how far are you going to have to go to get those comps? There might not be a lot other in the county, but you might be able to find supporting sales.
So why this side of the table is so important in this conversation? Because Scott will pick up the phone and call me and say, we're struggling with finding comps, right? And then is there some information I can provide? For instance, hey, there's recent contracts that are pending that you may not be aware of that we can share with you. Though they haven't closed yet, but there is some value to do there. But a better question to ask is, and we get this all the time, what if you can't find any comps? What if you literally can't find any comps? What's your next step?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Every property can be appraised, and because of that, there are always sales, there are always comps. It's a matter of where you're going to find them and how to find them. So first, you would try to go a little further distance, and then second, you would try to go back further in time, and then you may need to adjust for those things, but that's what you need to do. First, try to go a little further away into a similar market that just might be farther, and then you need to go back further in time, and that's what we would do from an appraisal standpoint.
So Jamie's got a follow-up. What about the years the comps are sold?
How far back?
Yeah, how far back do you go?
Oh, well, within a year, of course, are the requirements. And in a market like this, we try to stay within 3 to 6 months. Not always possible, certainly within a year. And then sometimes we go back 15 months. If we have to go back further, that's very rare because often we can find something within that time in this particular market area. But you can go back, of course, as far as you need to.
So it's very similar how we do our CMAs
Yeah.
and time frame and all this stuff. And again, it's just why a team approach is so important, even though we're technically not supposed to be talking, but we have, hey, we can have offline conversations. What do you see in the market like? We can share information, not specific to a property. But
Exactly.
what'll happen is we have a buyer, we're talking to Scott, right? And we're buying a custom home in the middle of Fulvana County.
So when you talk
Yeah.
custom home, that's something that got kind of scary for
Well, I'm not talking new construction. I'm talking a custom home that was built, right, that was extremely custom to that buyer. Now, we have a buyer who wishes to buy it, and the values just aren't comping out because they overbuilt the house.
overbuilt the house, or if they had an extreme amount of material increase
Sure.
through the process. That's something that I was dealing with for a few months. That seems to have kind of gotten
It's
back under
balanced a little
control.
bit out, yeah. The labor part, not so much, but the material side seems to have balanced out a little bit. And Scott, you bring up a great question. I should know this answer, but do you do new construction?
I do new construction, yes.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit
Yes.
of that. And I got a VA conversation. Do you do VA
I
also?
don't do VA. I do FHA.
Got it.
Yes.
But you know enough about VA to talk a little
Some,
bit about it?
sure.
Great. Because those are very different, and we'll get to that in a little bit later on
Yeah.
how that impacts Scott's side and our side. But so let's throw this out there. How does, from Scott's perspective, the new construction loan process work? And then from your perspective, the appraisal process a little bit?
So from an appraisal standpoint, it's going to be subject to. So we're going to request from the realtor or the builder the plans, contract, everything in order to present to the appraiser so that they can then put together a package on what they forecast the property being worth when it's completed. And then I'll just kind of kick that over to Wendy because that's basically all I do at that point.
Yeah.
Until the
Nice toss,
Yeah.
broadcaster. Very nicely done, Scott.
Well, and the value actually is as of the effective date that I inspect the property as though it were complete that day. So oftentimes I will then have to come in, as Scott was saying, and maybe I'll have to address change orders or things that, price increases that have come along, and sometimes buyers will have to come out of pocket for some of that. But it's generally that information that he gathers, or I'll gather from the realtor or the builder, and then put together through the same process. This is what the location is, the size of the house, all the factors that go into valuing the property, and then present him with an appraisal that's subject to completion. If it were completed as of this date, this is what it would be worth.
Got some comments coming in from agents,
Oh.
from realtors. First, we'll acknowledge the firms that are watching. Avenue,
Hey.
Nest,
Great.
of course, Yes Realty Partners, some of their team members, Howard Hanna, and folks at Real Estate 3, you two popular people here. This is from Real Estate 3 and our friend Dan Pettit. He has 2 questions for you. How many appraisers are in the Central Virginia area, roughly? And then the second question, how many escalation clauses do you see in the ratified contracts?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know how many appraisers are in the Central Virginia area. Maybe I should know that, but I don't. In the general Charlottesville area, there are 2 or 3 tiers that we think of. There are maybe 10 to 15 that are kind of top tier companies, and then from there we have outliers that do service this area, and maybe as many as 30 to 40 total that can competently satisfy appraisal standards in this region. Maybe that would be mostly Central Virginia. And then the second question was?
How many contracts
With escalations.
escalation clauses
Yeah.
in ratified contracts?
Almost every one that I've seen. I would say at least 80% of the contracts that I've seen on appraisal, or on contracts that have come through on appraisal requests, have been with escalation clauses.
Are you seeing the same thing, Scott? Are you seeing it whittle down or increase or?
No, I think I see more, but what's odd is, I've talked to, and, it goes back to kind of opinion, but there was a while there where people, some of the listing agents I've talked to would rather see just your highest and best than what the escalation is, but
Yeah.
I'm still seeing a lot of those
Well,
contracts.
I would fall in that category.
Yeah,
I'm not.
Most.
I personally am
because you're
not.
tipping off your number.
I'm not a fan of escalation clauses.
I mean, what do you think? Do you have any comment? You don't want to make a comment? No.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. But it's done. It's allowed.
I'm definitely not a fan.
Yeah. It makes it just. It's my personal opinion, for what it's worth, guys. I just prefer to give me your highest and best offer, and then we move on. But it doesn't happen, and we have to deal with it. It's a struggle for the seller, right? Because now you got to do all this complicated math.
Yeah, and is this what if worth more than this dude who steps in or dudette and says, let's go get this done right
Okay,
here.
dude. Dude.
It is a part of the process, I guess, and it does give us a little glimpse into what people are thinking when they're bantering back and forth. Gives
But
us a little
then we
idea.
have the conversation, look, okay, you just came in $50,000 over. Your escalation said I will go $1,000 over.
This goes back to like what I said in the beginning. This goes back to why not just make an offer of $1 million and see what it appraises at.
Correct. So I, as an agent, I would suggest to my client not to sign that
Right.
contract
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
because you've just lost 30.
So you're saying make an offer of
Right.
$1 million and have the appraisal contingency, and then it goes back to the
Yeah,
negotiation
so
table?
then that goes back to this escalation clause.
Well, that's like the
what
inspection
we're really
contingency.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like that topic at all.
Yeah. No, I'm okay with it. I'll talk
Break
about
it out doesn't like that
I will
topic.
talk about anything with you, Mr.
That puts a
Miller.
lot of heat on me as the appraiser.
Yeah.
Well, the reality of it is it's not, from my perspective, it is not in the best interest of the seller.
Right.
Because I damn well
Right, it
know
really
it's
isn't.
not going to appraise. We just took the house off the market for 30 days while Wendy is doing her appraisal. We just lost a couple of potential buyers. Who knows which? It's just, in theory, it may work, but no. I can assure you, anybody on our team will say, no, thank you. We do not suggest that.
That's what that's my whole point.
Yeah.
So to not speak on it would be like, bring your highest and best.
But the reality of it is, though, it is bring it back to where we're working at here, where if somebody gives an escalation clause of, we've got a contract $50,000 over one, we got an escalation clause where it's $1,000 above, and the conversation we have to say is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, or Mr. Seller, or Miss Seller, or whatever it is, this is not going to appraise, and here's why it's not going to appraise. And do you really want to take it off for 30 days? And of course, they're the client. If they say yes, that's what we want to do, then that's what we do. But it's not in their best interest to do that.
Right.
Your friend, not friend, your business associate, Megan Perry, is watching.
Hey,
She
Megan.
says,
Hi, Megan.
Wendy was just at my listing for an appraisal yesterday. She's very professional and extremely knowledgeable. That's Megan
She's
Perry
too
of Ness
kind.
Realty.
Megan
Thank
was
you,
a rock
Megan.
star on that Monday show.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was a fantastic show. Matthew
very
Winston will
kind.
give you
Yep.
guys some props as well. Questions, comments, put them in the feed. Let us know what you're thinking. How does 2021 stack up against 2020 for your business? And do you consider both anomalies over the tenure of your company?
Well, they're certainly different than any years that I've had in the 35 years I've been appraising. They're certainly very different, but there's not anything that's really unusual that I wouldn't have addressed maybe before. Escalation clauses are something I've addressed before, but at this rate, it's incredibly crazy to think that the market is doing what it's doing. So trying to stay current with the market has been incredibly difficult. That's probably one of the hardest things because oftentimes you have some really good comps. They're 6 months old, but they're old. Emphasis on old, and so we can't use them.
A
And
6-month-old comp in
Yeah.
COVID time is really old.
yeah, it
I
really
would- I
is.
would argue 90 days is
Yeah,
old.
and so it's difficult in trying to explain that to the lenders and getting a lot more follow-up, with questions and, hey, can you just cover this where we never had to before? That's more common, although we're pretty good. Our lenders are good about not having to come back because we know what to cover in advance
So
to try to help
let's
them.
define this a little bit because you say lenders, it's really the underwriters, right?
Well, that's right.
Right, it's not Scott, right? It's
Sure,
it's
and
how
then-
that process works.
And there's other pieces of it too. So just like a borrower gets, run through DU or LP or GUS, the property.
You want to define that for folks
so
that don't
through,
know?
through an automated underwriting system,
Got
an AUS, Fannie, Freddie, or USDA, each have their own independent one. Now, the property itself goes through collateral underwriter. So let's say the appraiser had, they went further away for a comp and there was more acreage. They were trying to get to a number, but then it scores really high. So 5 is bad, 2.5 below is good. So let's say it scores a 5. That's going to trigger a desk review, which means another appraiser goes and looks at this appraiser's work, and they might come back and say, hey, look, the reason they use this is because there's nothing else, everything, it looks good, it fits. But that's going to add some days to the process. Everybody's going to be in there's some anxiety there for all parties at that point. Are we going to close on time? When are we going to get this back? It's like, well, as soon as this other appraiser reviews this first appraiser's work. And they could even come in and say, hey, look, I can't tell enough about this property or this group of properties. We're going to need another appraisal.
So it's interesting you should bring that up. So you're talking about the appraisal process delaying closing, and there's National Association of Realtors does a confidence index report every year. So 2020 versus 2021, but problems encountered for delayed contracts, 26% of it is appraisal issues. So 26% of the reasons why contracts were delayed, so this means it was supposed to close today, but we had some appraisal issues, we had to extend the closing by whatever, then go ahead and do that. So and that's 10% above 2020, so the number was 10% less. So you're seeing appraisal issues holding up?
Turn times, but it goes back to, I think that we're still in a pretty blessed area. All things considered, there is a great number of competent appraisers that keep those turn times, to where we're still closing in 21 to 30 days.
So Wendy, I'm about ready to write a contract, right? And we have a very anxious buyer who wants to close quickly. What's your turnaround time these days?
Well, I try to stay with a standard 2-week quote to a lender, and then if I have to go beyond that, then I explain why I have to go beyond that. And if I can't meet that time frame, then I try to let them know you might try to somebody else. Generally, they'll still come back around. So I would say that turnaround times that are probably longer than that, just because I know that they're not finding anything out there, so they're coming back and saying, sure, we'll take the 2 to 3 weeks.
Same question for you, Scott. We're writing an offer. So everybody who knows in the real estate...
I'm telling everybody 18 days on the appraisal right now. So
no, I'm talking about from the time I hand from my financing contingency. Is it 30 days, 2 weeks?
So part of it depends on the buyers, loan program, the property. We're going to have a conversation about all of that to begin with. If we've got if we've got really organized buyers, the property's in an area where we are pretty sure we're going to get a quick turn. Let's close it in 21 days. Let's go get it. But if it's more rural, they're self-employed, and there's some questions that we might have. If there's stacks on stacks, let's say 30 to 45 days. But every situation, just like everything else.
You're explaining the exact reason.
That was a good answer, Scott.
Well, that's the reason you need a trusted advisor.
I know. Yeah. And he's also saying there's so many moving parts. I feel for you, man. There's so many moving parts here. You can't give us a succinct answer to that.
Not everybody fits the same shoe. Certainly there are situations where if we have all the pieces in place and we can go, hey, let's go make this offer may not be the highest, but it will be the best. And we can close it as quickly as we can possibly get it done. Let's go do it.
So the reason I was going down this road was, this is why you need a trusted advisor. We can pick up the phone and say, hey, Scott, I'm about ready to write a contract, another thing. You know the information on the buyer already, right? We want to try to expedite the closing. What's my narrowest window that I can put in my finance contingency? You don't get that with an online plug-in lender. That's why you need to pick up the phone and call a loan officer who has this conversation, who has done the homework on it. That's the conversation I was trying to get to on that.
Yes, well, absolutely. Thank you.
More comments coming in here from agents. What percentage of appraisals are rejected by you, Wendy, over the course of, let's say, a year?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily use the word rejected. I have particular lenders that I'm approved with that typically I will accept their work as a standard basis, and then from there I have other AMCs and so forth that occasionally I'm able to help out, not always, and so forth. So Goodness, I probably turn away as much work as I take in just because people are always looking, always wanting quotes, always wanting to know what the turn time is.
So go back to this, we don't have any comps. You have another tool available to you, right? You have the replacement cost tool, is that correct?
Well, we do. It's not something we use as often,
Sure.
Especially with the fluctuating,
Market.
with the costs and the
But
disability.
can you explain what that is for folks who may not know?
Sure. So we have actually three approaches to value. We hope we can always use the sales comparison analysis where there are sales and there are comps and so forth to be able to compare to our subject property and come to a conclusion of value. It's the most accurate. Sometimes when you've got a newer property, and of course the older it gets, the less accurate it is, but we have the cost approach. And so we can develop an estimated cost of value for a property as well. And sometimes we'll use both, and that can be supportive, especially with new construction. We'll employ both approaches. There's also the income approach. If it's a rental property or it's a big rental market and the lender wants to know, hey, this is going to be a rental property, tell me what would be a value based on some kind of rental income here. We can employ that. That's less common, but with rental properties, it's more common.
We got a question from an investor. This is from Tim Smith for Scott. When buying investment properties, how much prioritization do you put on rental income? And second part of his question, if he has a lease signed in hand and he brings that to you, does that have more value when funding this particular investment property? Those are two good questions right there.
So, from an underwriting standpoint, they're only going to count 75% of the income.
If the lease is in hand?
If the lease is in hand.
How about if there is no, he says it could rent for this.
There
is zero, right?
Zero, yeah. Then you need to be able to support it in case it does run for zero. That's, if there's nobody
But they're
there.
also going to look at that too, because if the lease goes away, you have to be able to support 100%.
Well, that's what it said, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
apologize.
and previous rental history, do you have other rental properties and supporting the income that's coming from those? They're going to draw back that as well. You need to be able to show that you can support it. Let's say you're going to do 6 months of renovation before you put renters in there and not collect any money. Like, you have to show that you're going to be able to support the mortgage.
But so I have an investment buyer. We're buying a piece of property. We're going to sit down and talk to Scott. One of the first things we're going to find out is if it's an existing tenant, I'd like to see a copy of the lease, right? We want to see the rent history. What is the rent history has been for that while? That's information that's helpful for you, correct?
It's helpful, but supporting the investor's still responsible for the mortgage, not the tenant.
Right. So let's highlight something that you just said. So an investor that has other properties that he or she may own, the rent rolls on those properties, you will not consider 100% value of those rent rolls.
So previous year's tax, if they're new rentals, no.
Okay.
If they're previous years, then yes.
How many years do you need?
1 year, 12-month period,
Okay.
filed on taxes.
Okay.
So one of the questions we get asked all the time when sometimes appraisals come from other areas, why does that happen? Why do they come from the outside? Why does that actually happen? Is there an explanation to that?
Do you mean why was an appraiser chosen from another area?
outside the area that don't live in
Let's
the
say it was a
Charlottesville.
complicated property. Let's say it had multiple units
There you
and
go.
other people, local appraisers looked at it and went, God, that looks like a headache. I'm not going to accept it. So then they keep reaching out until they find somebody who will do it. And then finally you get somebody from outside of the area and everybody throws their hands up. It's like your local appraisers didn't
Well,
want to work.
in complicated, particularly commercial stuff or rental situations, that's not an uncommon thing.
Or even, let's say, we love the ADU.
yeah, sure.
So, but when the ADU becomes more of is this a real ADU or is this a second unit?
Brother, I've been playing this story all the way across the country about auxiliary dwelling units. They from an appraiser, it's a great question. From an appraiser's perspective, how does that factor in? So an auxiliary dwelling unit, we own a home in Belmont. I've got a little 4, 5, 6, 800 square foot auxiliary dwelling unit in there. How does that impact
Great
it
question.
from your
Well,
point?
it definitely impacts value. We have to first determine, as Scott was saying, whether it is an ADU to begin with. So
Legally.
yes, legally. I mean,
Or does the county have it listed? Let's say it's bigger. Let's say it's not in Belmont, it's small. Let's say it's an actual full second house and it's got an extra address and driveway. how is there power going to the property? Are there 2 meters, or is there
We
1
recently
meter?
done that, you and I.
did
You and I.
recently do that.
Yeah. Well, exactly. We have to determine whether it's legal, whether we would go to the city or go to the county and say, do you even reflect this property? Is it legal? Have they gone through the process of getting the permits that they need and so forth? And then do they have what's necessary to call it an ADU? Do they have the cooking unit and the legal bedroom and the bathroom, all the things that go with it? And then we have to start the process of what is this worth and how much does it contribute or take away from the value, which typically will contribute to value, but...
So you just open up a Pandora's box,
Oh,
Scott,
no.
on ADUs here.
That's bad.
Let's go down the road if the ADU has a different address. All the possibilities of the ADU. So the ADU is a cottage in the backyard, for example, and there's some in Belmont that do have different addresses than the primary residence.
It's usually an
Yeah.
A and B thing, so it'd be, 35, blah, 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 blah.
Right,
35B, 35A, that kind of thing.
Okay, so what's the value, or how do I phrase
So what
this
you're
question?
trying to prevent it from being is multifamily.
That's
Right.
exactly
You
right.
want it to be is an ADU.
Okay.
So the power going to you can't have separate meters.
Well, you can have separate meters, but again, it goes back to what
Well,
was...
so it may make it for you as far as an appraiser, but as far as a lender.
Nightmare for him.
It'd be a nightmare,
night-
right,
Good
for
for-
lending purposes.
from appraisal standpoint.
Sure. From an
Yeah.
appraisal standpoint, it's fine to have
Well,
separate
welcome to
meters,
our
it's
world,
fine to have
folks.
separate addresses and all of that. You still have to meet the requirements of whatever it is. If the ADU has to be within the 35% size of the, the
Well,
bigger
each
house and
jurisdiction
so
has
forth.
totally
Exactly.
different
Believe me,
counties
I-
can make it weird.
Right,
Yeah.
and it could just be that it's a legal duplex and not an ADU at all. So those things have to be determined from the
Well, then
appraisal
that's the
standpoint.
two separate addresses.
Yeah.
Right, that's two
Sometimes, not always. An ADU can still have a separate,
Yeah.
yeah.
We'll leave that as a side, because
Yeah.
that was the issue that we had in a recent.
We got it done with the separate address isn't necessarily a problem. It's with separate address and separate meter, you create a second unit.
And in our case, that was the case.
And so how was it then considered a duplex?
No. This
No.
is
Just a separate ADU?
Yeah, just a separate ADU.
Right.
But that took a little bit of working with the county and different
Yeah.
stuff to get it done.
This question is coming in about the value for Scott of Airbnbs with home.
I don't know anything about Airbnb.
No.
So basically no value.
No. That's
Okay.
if you're choosing to do it, that's cool, but that's not.
Don't want to know about that till
Yeah.
after it's closed.
Okay, got it. Absolutely got it. So don't bring that up with your loan officer.
Yeah.
Is what he's saying right there.
That's
Is that
exactly
what you're saying?
what I'm saying.
Okay.
So
that's
let's
exactly
talk
what I'm
about the unpleasantness that Mr. Miller
saying. Neil
brought.
Williamson's watching. Yeah.
No, the comment you made about home inspections,
Okay.
right? You don't want to see home inspections.
No, I don't
Right.
mind talking about them, but please don't send anything that could then accidentally find its way into an underwriter's hands.
Into a fire.
Yeah.
They-
So he's basically saying if that roof is 29 years on a 30-year roof, make sure that does not get in the fire.
Well, I mean, then we go back to opinion. Like,
If it ain't leaking,
Yeah.
it's a good roof.
Yeah, right?
It's a good roof.
How do you look at the?
We do. We're responsible for, well, not the home inspection.
No.
Most people try to keep the home inspection away from the appraiser as far as possible. Sometimes we see it or know of things, but we're expected to report on what we observe. We don't have to go up into the attic and check all of that stuff unless it's an FHA situation or something. We're not crawling down in the crawl space to see that there's mold all over the joists and things are rotting out. But if we observe anything,
You got to report it.
then we have to report it, and we
So
would
let's
then...
talk about that, because
Yeah.
that's a real thing, right?
Yes.
So VAs are very different. Since you're not a VA appraiser, we'll kind of
I know
stay a
less
little bit
about
about
VA,
that.
but
I can
sure.
tell you from a practitioner's perspective, they look at things a little bit more intently as far as quality of the building or the finish of the building. Would you agree with that? Oh no, he's sighing.
And while we're talking about that, specifically, just because I feel like this is a huge misconception, when it comes to obtaining value, there's no difference in the way VA, FHA, and conventional goes about coming up with actual value, is there?
No, not necessarily. Value is still determined by the same processes, no matter what person is funding the loan or what entity is doing the mortgage or backing the mortgage. It's still the same process.
I think there's
appraisal
I think there's some misconception from some listing agents on not wanting to accept a VA
Well,
loan.
don't get me started on that.
I know,
that,
but
that
it's a
pisses
huge
me
deal.
off beyond
I mean, it's
belief.
the only product that gives you like a warning flare when things are coming in low because it triggers Tidewater, and then we as the lender, working with the agents, if the appraisal came in low, can go to the VA and get a reconsideration of value outside of the appraiser's opinion. It's the only thing that can do.
As a vet, as a disabled vet, that just brings up. We don't even want to go down there.
Yeah.
I get angry
the
real fast
inspection
about
process is different, and the reporting of certain things is different, but the appraisal process itself in
But
valuing
assuming that the
is the
property
same.
is in good condition, then you have the best product available as that offer goes. If the property is in less than, if it's distressed, then maybe we've got some, maybe then your conventional product
Sure.
could be
it.
better.
Let's rally this back a little bit, Wendy. So we went through home inspection, right? Nobody's seen the home inspection. We've negotiated that. Everybody's happy. We're moving along. You're in an appraisal. You walk into a home and you see something that must end up a discrepancy of some sort. It must end up on the appraisal. Typically, what are they? Let's pick one off the top of your head that you might
Something that
see.
I might just typically
You
note.
see often?
Oh, it would be like evidence in a ceiling of a roof leak or something
Okay,
like that.
right. So let's use
might
that.
be an issue.
So you see a roof leak. You need to note it now.
Yes.
In the appraisal, and then you get it.
And it's going to come in
And then
either
I get a
as
phone-
is or subject to, and it could say, subject to repairing the leaking roof. Now, let's say we had a home inspection and the inspector went through and saw that it was old damage, and then we could then send that information to the appraiser
That's
and say,
exactly what I was
it's
trying to get
actually
to.
already been fixed.
That's exactly right.
Typically, I won't say subject to repairing. What I will say, because I'm not a roof expert or an expert in structural things, but if it's a safety, soundness, or structural thing, and I think it needs to be noted, I will say subject to inspection by a certified roofer, and then they'll send me a paper. Yep, it's been looked at, it's all good, it's been repaired, and I sign off and it's done.
We'll get you to, you're dropping phenomenal knowledge.
I'm
Phenomenal knowledge. And you got a lot of comments coming in. If we can get
Great.
you just to slide, yeah,
Little bit
perfect.
this way.
That way, that's perfect, that's
Hello.
perfect. So this is a good one for Wendy. How many drive-bys do appraisals do for appraising? And also, when do you not even go for a drive-by? And then a follow-up to this one is, did you do more drive-bys during COVID versus pre-COVID because folks didn't want you in the homes?
Well, I personally did not. I told my lenders I'm not going to do drive-bys. So there may have been an increase in drive-bys. I did none.
We should, maybe
Yeah.
what we do is, what is a drive-by?
A drive-by is basically an exterior inspection of the property. I won't necessarily go on the property. I'll drive by on the street. I'll stop there. I'll take a picture. I'll look at things from what I can observe from all angles from the street. I'll get information from any records I can get from MLS, maybe tax records and so forth, old data, and then gather a value based on that.
It's important to note, though, the regulators allowed that to happen.
Right, because of
Right,
COVID.
Yes.
because of COVID. So
Yes.
it's important to note.
So a lot of your peers did those.
Yes, they definitely did.
So is that the second part of a question, and that was a
The second part of the question is pre versus post-COVID.
Got it.
How many drive-bys were done in general?
They were definitely on the increase, and I had several other appraisers tell me they were doing a lot more. I chose not to do them. I like to be as accurate as possible, so.
So I want to kind of go back to this repair leaking roof
Sure.
example. The only reason because we get asked this question. So there's an evidence of a leaking roof. It got missed in home inspection. You get the appraisal. There is no verification that it's been repaired. I get a phone call, and what are you going to tell me?
We got to send somebody out to look at this thing.
So we might have to fix that in order to close, because in order for the underwriters to sign off on it, there's going to have to be evidence that it's fixed. So that is why this home inspection process is so important through the process, because we would, A, say, hey, we can demonstrate this has been fixed, or we're in the process of fixing it, and then it'll get fixed on such and such a date. Then you can report it up the chain of command to the appraiser, and then we can close. It's just important because it's not a common thing, but it does happen from time to time that you give us a phone call and say, we got to fix this, and
Sure.
And then we go fix it.
Yes.
This is an interesting question for you, Scott. How many cash at closing deals are you seeing in the last 18 months?
Cash at closing, like paying over the appraised value?
Yeah.
Maybe like 5 or 10%. Like most of the time, appraisals are coming in and people aren't having to pay over. I mean, I've got one right now. I was on the phone right before the show where they'd agreed to it in the contract, and we've got a rebuttal in, and we're waiting to see where things land. But
So that falls in our ballpark to negotiate
the buyers,
number.
they've already agreed on it. You know, they're going to pay the $10,000 over.
That's why that's so important on the front end, right? So there's a number, and the risk that the seller takes is that if it is over 10 or 5 or whatever, or under, that number is, they have the right to walk, and then we potentially lose a buyer. So generally what happens is we just get back and start negotiating, and usually everybody gives a little bit, and we get to where we need to be.
This is another good question for both of you guys. How many buyers of homes on the market are buyers from outside Central Virginia that you guys are seeing?
You know, I don't know that I pay that close of attention to that. It doesn't come across my
Yeah, that would
my
be
radar
more in
as
our
much.
department.
Yeah, and it depends on I think it depends on how the realtors built their business. Like, so I work with some teams in Fredericksburg that do a lot of relocation in the kind of the Stafford, Quantico area. So, and then in Charlottesville, I've seen more like work from home type of situations, but I think we talked about that the last time we were on. So.
Yeah, so from our world, we're seeing agents from outside the market come in. This is new. It's never been at this kind of volume from my perspective anyway, from our particular experience. I want to go back to the gaining access because it kind of plays off of this agents coming from different areas. It applies to the appraiser, because if an appraiser is coming, say, from Richmond, and they don't have access to our boxes, we now need to figure out a way to gain access, allow the appraiser to gain access. So there's a couple of ways to do it. One is we physically meet them there, or we put a manual lockbox in there with 2 separate keys, one in the digital box and one in that, and we have this conversation to get in there. But that's part of the complication of, usually I know I'm in trouble when the appraiser says, I don't know how to gain access, then that means they're not in our footprint.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, a lot of times I'll say, can you meet me out there? Do you have a combo
Sure.
lockbox? Just mainly it's because I can then ask questions of the agent or whatever. I may want to know, what do you know about the property? Tell me about the history. Tell me about, what's been selling on the street, what's been happening. Oftentimes it's not a thing that the agent is able to do. I'm happy to pick up a key and things like that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's not in the market, but if you know it's somebody from out of the market, it always is good to meet them.
This is a good question, and this one's going to lead us into our next topic, which I know is a topic you want to hit. Jonathan Galasso, Jerry, for the panel, please ask them if they see a bubble on the horizon. These prices don't seem sustainable to me, and there's no inventory on the market, these multiple offer situations that are driving prices up, and you touched on folks from outside the area buying these properties. It seems to me that there's a bubble, but please ask the panel this question.
We kind of touched on this in the past too. Like, there's enough equity and there's not the same mechanics in place for a bubble to exist in the same way that it did previously.
So the lending requirements
Are much more stringent.
are many, many times more restrictive. And this whole reason we're having this conversation is this whole separation here that we're talking about, where the lender, other than at Real Talk and the I Love Charlottesville Network, can have a conversation on stuff. They can't do that. There is this.
So one of the things, if you look at the numbers about who is in deferment or who is not paying, the rental market was much, much greater
Sure.
than the homeowner.
The forbearance is what you're speaking
Yeah,
of.
forbearance versus.
The number is not. I had a debate with my son-in-law about that, about the number, and the number is substantially below 2 million. I don't have it with me.
And it
He
does-
thought it was higher.
He thought it, but 200 or 300 million people, it has to be higher than that, and it's not. I think it's somewhere. Please don't quote this number, but I think it's like $1.5 million, $1.25 million, $1.4 million. that folks are still in forbearance. So, we're not going to, everybody I talk to, we're not going to see a foreclosure.
Because even if let's say all 2 million of them immediately, the current servicer
We're
said
5.5 million units short.
the current servicer said, you know what, we're not even going to give you a plan, which is not what they want. They want to,
Well, they can't. They have to. Legally, they have
right.
to.
But let's say they pushed all 2 million of those properties on the market. Right now,
We'll take the listings.
Even if interest rates went up, 0.75%, there's still enough qualified buyers out there. They'd absorb
You can
it.
bleep that out, right?
And low enough
Maybe,
inventory.
hopefully, it would be enough. I will say that it would be great. I mean, for things to plateau. I don't see them going.
Yeah.
down.
So I have the historical reference of the great unpleasantness. And I told the story once or twice before. I was in the middle of my development. The system was broken. It was devastated. It didn't even exist. This coffee cup could have bought a $500,000 house. I would have bankers walk into my office when I was developing and offer me millions and millions and millions of dollars of loans and pay me to borrow the money from them. There was negative interest, and I'm not too smart, but I don't think that's sustainable. And I usually kicked them right out. Usually I always did. Get the hell out of my office. I don't want to talk to you. So the system was broken, and we don't see that now. And there's a flip side to it. Because of the system is the requirements to do it is so high up there, it's just causing inventory struggles, right? That units are not turning over as much. Plus, you have the thing that folks are staying in their homes for 10 years versus 5 years. So folks are staying in longer, right? We're 5.5 million units short on new construction. Anybody who watches the show knows this is the same speech I've been giving. It's just not there. What we're not going to see, in my opinion, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is these double-digit appreciations. We're going to kind of see the 3 to 4. And is that kind of what you're seeing, is these normal 3 to 4%, 5% increases instead of these huge jumps?
Well, a little bit of both, but mostly, I agree with Scott in his assessment. I think that, even if we have, as prices go up and incomes are struggling and affordability and unemployment and all of those things are struggling, I still think we don't have a bubble. Could we have a crash? Well, sure, we could have a crash, but
I think
it's
an adjustment.
unlikely.
The crash is a tough word.
Yeah,
Correction.
There's going to be an adjustment. We're already seeing it.
Right.
There's an adjustment of it where I looked at the numbers today. This is every 7 days I look at what comes on the market. We're over 100 units week over week for a couple weeks running. Right. That's new. It's never been like that before.
Yeah, and I do think that with foreclosures, I think the equity position, as you were saying, is good. And so even if we had an influx of properties, people could still put them on the market and sell them without being forced into a position of, wow, we're appraising all foreclosures again like we were back then.
So everything I'm reading,
different.
go back into your world, Scott. Everything I'm reading from all these really smart economists and PhDs and all that stuff, we're looking in the next 12 to 24 months for this mortgage rate to come close to 4%. Or is that kind of your crystal ball too? And
That's what,
Hard to tell.
we were saying that a year ago, and
It never happened. That's exactly right.
We'll find out tomorrow what the Fed's going to do to tapering, but if it means that they're buying $15 billion less of mortgage-backed securities a month, there's enough investors out there that kind of want to pick that up at the moment. We're seeing some LLPA, some loan level price adjustments come off the table, things that the government had put in place, and I think they're doing that because there's going to be more investors stepping in and buying these loans going forward.
So we're constantly talking about inventory, and the question that I'm going to try to get to is, if it goes to that number, or when it goes to that number, is that going to open the market up a little bit? So if interest rates increase...
Were you selling houses in 2019?
I was.
I think you're going to keep selling them if they go up a little bit.
I would
the
agree
big
with
thing
that.
for buyers is, I hear I have these conversations frequently of what if waiting for this correction to happen. Like, well,
Why are you waiting?
What do you expect the correction to be?
Correct.
Do you expect things to stop going up, or stay at where they are? And if you think they're going to go down, how much do you expect them to go down?
So you're talking about interest rates or price of homes?
Both. If
Got it.
interest rates go up and the housing prices stay the same or correct 10%,
So it's
you're still
the
paying-
correction. The correction is
your
not
monthly
going to
nut
be
doesn't change.
down. The correction is going to be the percentage of appreciation year over year.
Bingo.
That's where the correction is going to
Yeah,
be.
100%.
If you have the rates go up, are we going to see a smaller pool of buyers and this crazy market stabilize? Because that's certainly the speculation.
You're going to see, sure, there's going to be at different price points. So, at your 600,000 to 350, you're probably going to see less buyers there, but that's going to push some of those people down into that 300 and below, where we're already having so much struggle.
So
Well,
let's
then follow-up question to that is, the follow-up question to that would be, what do we need to change this market to more of a buyer's market?
More inventory.
Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, but that's the answer.
That's the answer.
So let me take that a different direction. So 2018, 2019, I think that's more of a normal market. If we take a look at 2000, I think anybody who's listening or watching the show would kind of agree to that. So a question for you, Scott. 2018 versus now. With 2018 and 19, did you see more people bringing cash deposits, the down payments down? So in other words, is folks bringing more cash now to the table?
Good question.
For a deal versus
Yes,
18?
I've seen more creative, more cash.
And why is that?
I don't know, where did it all come from?
COVID.
Well,
Do you
yeah.
think because people saved money and they didn't go out the last 18 months
Well,
to happy hour
all the
restaurants?
things I'm reading are echoing that they're saving money.
Credit card debt's down.
Credit card debt's down. That's exactly right. So what's happening is more people are bringing cash to the table. Now, from my perspective,
Or is it more people are prioritizing the home experience versus, say, travel because they're at home more working?
that very well could be. The point I was trying to get at is in order to win a deal, you might have to bring some cash to the table. Intuitively, at 2%, 3%, why the hell would you use your own cash, right?
Yeah,
Right?
right.
On that end of it. But it becomes an issue of trying to get the deal done, right? Trying to win the day for your client. And we're seeing more cash down, and even at the affordable housing or at the first-time home buyer level, that they're bringing more cash than I thought. And I used the word affordable housing on purpose. This project we're doing for Spring Hill over there, and I was surprised, are out of the 7, only 2 of them needed down payment assistance. The remaining of them actually had was $7,000 cash, which surprised me.
Well, for the first-time home buyer, I've got an amazing non-Virginia housing down payment assistance program that allows them to borrow at 100%, and then if they're bringing cash, to use that for closing. So they're making a stronger offer on their own without having to ask for assistance.
This is a good follow-up. Are you seeing better credit scores now because people are using the credit card less?
Yes, yes and no. I mean, it's.
But the score requirements are moving around a little bit, aren't they, by the law?
Well, I mean, when COVID happened, everything tightened up, and then we've seen them walk back down over the last year.
So credit scores are coming a little bit lower, so you qualify at lower credit
I can
scores
qualify a lower score.
than you did in the middle of COVID.
Correct.
Xavier Europe from Emergent Financial Services. Housing starts and building permits went up month over month, so the market is telling us that inventory is low, so new building needs to happen. We know new building needs to happen. And he follows, does anyone there truly believe that interest rates will rise?
Well, they have to. I mean, they're not.
Yeah, I mean, they can't. They're not going back down without another crisis, and I think we're kind of, I don't want to get into all that, but.
But how much lower can you go?
Right, exactly.
And he's alluding to this, if interest rates rise, that's the government essentially taxing themselves on their own debt.
Yes.
That's why he's saying, that's why Xavier's alluding, and I'm reading between the lines here, why would the government raise these rates when they're just going to tax themselves?
But the market
Because
impacts
they
that
need to pay
a little
themselves
bit.
back for all the money they borrow.
And they need to also keep inflation in check.
Yeah.
Well, that's a whole different topic.
That would be the response though, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination, it's a layer cake of why they would do it. Yeah, there's a ton of reasons that they're going to do it. The government wants, they want inflation up above 2%, and because in order to pay back all the money that they keep borrowing from themselves, that's how that's their only mechanism to do that with.
This one's for Wendy. The impact of new construction in this area on driving prices up. It seems like everything that's brand new, shiny, and sexy is coming in with Albemarle County with an 8 in front of it. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that.
That's true. It is true.
Particularly the shiny and sexy part.
Yeah.
They were talking about us, right?
No, yes,
okay.
they were. They were talking about you, Keith. I mean, everything in Albemarle that's brand new, I mean, it seems like it has an 8. I mean, the neighborhoods I'm in is
New
like
construction.
2,600 square feet on 0.3, 0.4, 8.
Right. Yeah. It is true, and it's a problem. And first-time home buyers, especially, are struggling. Anybody that wants new construction is struggling if they can't meet that price point, and that certainly is a limited pool of people. But it does have an impact, a heavy impact on people.
You guys are awesome. This is fantastic. We're getting more of the bubble talk. Neither of you guys see a bubble on the horizon.
I don't.
I mean, I hope for a plateau, but I don't see a bubble.
Yeah, so bubble just implies something's going to blow up like the last time. I think, Wendy, you and I have been doing this pretty much the same length of time since '87. Matter of fact, exactly the same length of time. We've seen some corrections up and down, and I think that's what you're going to see. I think where so the balloon, maybe instead of popping, there's just going to be a little bit of helium let out of it and reduce its diameter.
That kind of goes along with what the government is, alluding to, and they're tapering, and there's what they're doing with inflation to increase it, and what they're trying to do to prevent it from increasing faster than they hope it to be. But again, maybe we'll see tomorrow what this whole tapering plan looks like.
So I ran a 20-year spreadsheet from our car footprint on appreciation year over year, and the reason I did 20 years, it included the years of unpleasantness, and we were somewhere between 3 to 5% year over year average. That it kind of worked. Each year kind of fluctuated a little bit one way or the other, and I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to not see this, high single digit year over year, double digit year over year. You're going to see a more consistent, I think, 3 to 6%. It's not what I think, it's what all the smart PhDs are saying. So I just think the balloon is going to, instead of being this big, it's going to be that big. Well, but it's still going to move forward.
The appraisal is there, what we're here talking about today. The appraisal is in place to keep things from going up too fast and keep things from going down too fast.
So that's the reason I wanted to have this appraisal conversation, for this very question about the bubble, that you are the stopgap. In that, in your industry is the stopgap to prevent us and the buyer.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry. You can handle it.
I had someone tell me the other day. It was a realtor that said, when the appraisers start doing something, then we'll see this stop. So there's a little pressure there.
Well, that question's been asked on the feed here. Is your job driving the market? The valuations that you're putting on these
That's a great question.
Well, I mean, I would hope not.
I think it's more the buyers, right?
Yeah, I mean, it should be
the parties
that
a great
are
question.
Purchasing and selling and negotiating out there. I mean, our job is just to reflect the value as of a certain date with data in the market, and give our best opinion of the most probable price for a property.
So it goes back to that 20% thing, and this is a follow-up question to that. At some amount of cash down, there's a potential of having an appraisal waiver. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so and there's a lot of things that go into that. The biggest thing is what it was last sold for and how it was recorded, and then making sure that you go to the USPS, the U.S. Postal Service site, and you get the address matching in your findings. So when I'm building everything in the loan, that perfectly matches the way that it was recorded last. So if the value from what the borrower or buyer is putting down is less than what the last recorded value is, we will most likely get an appraisal waiver. The other parts of that algorithm, there's tons of things where you should think that it would trigger, and you don't get one. Sometimes I think if there's too much value, like in it's like a cash out refinance, but they're only taking half the value, and you feel like it's built to where it should give you a waiver, and it doesn't, and now you're out ordering it.
So the important part I'm trying to point out is
This guy's good.
and you need to talk to a trusted advisor, somebody like Scott Morris with
Yeah.
Morris Mortgage, because depending on the
Nicely done.
thank you, sir, thank you. It's the coffee. Depending on the structure, we got to let the
Charlottesville's finest.
bravest drive on by. So but there is a potential, depending on how the deal is structured, the property, your financial strength, that there could be an appraisal waiver which would not involve Wendy at all.
Correct. And on purchases that we're seeing now that from maybe someone who bought 5 years ago and they're like, wow, I need to take advantage of this. Those 5 years and newer are the ones where you're really seeing it on purchases. Somebody's putting 20% down. We're below the value of the last appraisal and everything matches. That's where you're seeing it on new construction, or not new construction, just new purchases.
Dan has got a good question for you. This is for Wendy. How do you appraise mobile homes? Is there a different formula you use for this?
And add modular to that thinking too, prefabricated.
Great, that's two different things. Modular homes, there's a different appraisal form, and there's a different set of data that's collected. In those cases, we do have to go into the attic and do have to look underneath and so forth for whether the wheels and the chassis and all of that have been removed, and reporting whether the HUD data plates and so forth, certification labels are on. So there's a different process as far as inspection and data gathering. The valuation process is still the same to find other mobile homes to compare to in a similar market and so forth. So the process itself is still the same. The data and the inspection
But you probably
is very
don't do a
different.
ton of them, I would imagine.
I do quite a bit of those.
Really?
Yeah,
You do?
yeah. we find
Wow.
those
I
quite
do enough.
often.
It's one of the
Yeah.
things that I generally try to. There's some things everyone needs to look out for. So the first thing that I'm saying to the agent is, all right, here's a foundation engineer, and we're going to send them out, and they're going to get us a certificate before we go any further, because that way if there's skirting or there's something
So let's
underneath-
define that. The difference is it must be on a foundation versus wheels,
Sure.
because you mentioned taking the wheels
And
off.
never moved.
It never moves. So what we're doing is we're taking a mobile home and we're placing it on a permanent foundation. Therefore, it's a permanent structure.
Correct.
Okay?
Right.
I just wanted to get that out there for folks who may not.
Yeah, part
Sorry,
of the
I interrupted you,
determination.
Scott. Please finish.
Just that, we want to get the engineer out, we want to get that HUD cert in place, or if there's any work that needs to be done to make sure that happens, that's done. The HUD plate's visible on the property. I'm asking the question, hey, can we find out if whoever set this thing in place turned the title into the DMV to convert it from mobile to real property? That way we don't get to the very end and find out that the title company isn't going to insure it, or that not until that's done. So there's a series of things that I'm walking the buyer, borrower, and agent through to prepare for in the process along with the appraiser.
Ray Cadell says hello.
Hi, Ray.
In fact, he's got a very nice message for you. Please tell Wendy I said hi. Although we've worked together many times, I've known her for a very long time, and her husband, Lindsay, even longer.
Yes. Hi, Ray. Thank you.
Ray's good people.
Yes, he is.
This is a good one from Xavier. Real estate, and curious of your thoughts on this. Real estate has lagged the stock market for years. Now that inflation is all the talk and millennials are hitting the homeowner age, I think real estate may continue to go up, up, and up. Thoughts on that, Scott Morris?
I mean, before all this crazy stuff happened, we knew demographically the next 5 years were going to be beneficial to everyone in this business because of millennials coming of age to purchase. However, what we're running into from an inventory standpoint makes it harder for them to get into the market. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but yes, supply drives demand.
Yes.
Yeah.
The millennial buyer, so Xavier and I are of the same boomer age bracket. The millennial buyer, if you look at it statistically, is multiple times more than the buyer profile of the boomers. It's a huge buying profile. It's one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing on the show, so the millennials can take a look at it. We didn't quite finish the second half of my question. Is the modular concept pretty much the same, right?
It's not so much. A modular is considered a little bit more like a stick-built home. So that is, of course, modulars are appraised on the same form as a stick-built home, single-family, whatever it is, where a manufactured home has its own manufactured housing form. So modular, very much like a stick-built. You don't always have to find modular comps for that. Process of appraising it is the same, and oftentimes the modulars are built so similar to the stick-built that people don't even know that it's modular unless they're told.
And how the county records it probably makes a big difference as well.
I just realized it's 11:30.
That's all right. That's all right. This is fascinating. We got more questions coming in. We'll wrap up here shortly. I know their time is valuable. This is a good one for Scott. Consumer confidence tied to what the market is doing, and the market has been rough in September. How is that impacting loan applications that come across your desk?
I think September is more, or late August has more to do with when people go back to school, kids, than anything to do with the market. Because I've had a lot of applications come in over the weekend, and I don't think any of them. I don't think most people who are making a decision based on wanting to change their living situation are tying that decision to what the stock market is doing.
No, but they do tie it to, and we'll talk a little bit about this, Scott, is most folks, not necessarily, I mean, interest rate drives the conversation, but they really want to know how much house can I afford for my monthly payment, right?
Sure.
And that's usually is that usually the conversation you have?
If somebody wants to get out of an apartment, or if they're leaving one area to move to another, or they're getting divorced, or whatever their situation is much more a driver of their purchasing want or need than if the interest rates went to 4.5% and they could afford to buy, but were like, I cannot live with this other human anymore, I am leaving and buying another house.
Have you been talking to Yona?
They may not be stoked that about the change in the market, but they're still going to go make the decision.
Yeah, and you're spot on. The buyers are going to buy because of life changes. It's more of an emotional decision than it ever is fiscal. Of course, fiscal impacts it, right? But generally what we have found is, this is the price point that I need to stay at per month. Scott, how much house can I buy, right? Because that's would be the first person we would send over is to Scott. How much house can I afford for this? You would give us a number. We would go find it, hopefully, right? And then...
Now, I will say this, though. If we're talking rates and buyers, does an increase in rates potentially take more investors off the table, and does that open more single family up to the millennial trying to get in? Yeah, sure. So let the rates go up. Who's that bad for? It's probably worse for the investor than it is for the person trying to get in.
So let's talk about that. How many investor loans do you do versus, do you do a percentage?
I mean, I do a small percentage. I would say less than 5%. Most of my business is really focused on primary, yeah. And not to mention, I take more value in helping someone in that situation than the dude who's trying to
stacking paper.
Yeah, how do we get an eighth house into my portfolio? It's like, that's.
Are you one of the few that do primary and investor clients? Because a lot of primaries don't do the investor.
I mean, I think there's probably a lot that do.
They just choose not to.
Yeah, it's probably a want more than it is a can or can't.
But the rules have changed a little bit on that, right?
Well, if we're getting into commercial stuff, then I
get that, but...
You don't do commercial?
Don't do commercial.
Yeah, that's a pretty specific skill set. That's a whole different... And we'll bring in a commercial person soon on that end of it. But, generally, it's, hey, I want to buy... a second home, right? That's considered potentially an investment home. Or I want to buy a rental property, 1 or 2. When you start getting over a certain number of it, it becomes a little different world, right? I believe it's 10. Isn't that change the dynamics on all that stuff?
Yeah. Okay. Then you need to go to commercial anyways.
Yeah, got it. So 10 and under, you can help. Anything over 10 is a commercial. That's what I thought. So
I got a closing question for these guys. Your thoughts on how 2022 is going to play out?
Chemistry worked. That's where I was going.
Kind of a little chatted about. I mean, if rates go up, does it? I don't think it changes a lot. I think a year ago we were talking about the next 5 years being prior to COVID, being great just from the number of people who are coming of age, who are in a position to become first-time home buyers and make that decision. We know it would take an insane amount of inventory to kind of quell this.
Nationwide, we're 5.5 million units short. It's just the timeline is just years instead of months. It's just going to take a long time for inventory. But I got to tell you, Scott, you got my brain turning about if interest rates go up a little bit, it might help a little bit, but some of that investor component may come out of the market on that end of it, which may, even if it's 5% or 10% of your total loan pack, loans you do, that's something anyway. That's an extra 5 or 10%.
Yeah, I don't anticipate a huge change in 2022. A little bit more of the same. There may be some correction, as we talked about, but barring any, big global changes, I don't anticipate
I can't even
a
believe
big
I'm thinking this.
change.
I'm thinking, well, what about 2023? But I won't say it. So,
Don't go there yet.
We don't go there yet. I can tell that we are having a successful show by how fast Jerry's fingers are moving on the keyboard. A lot of folks coming in here. I want to invite you both back. Please come back. This has been fun. I've been trying to get an appraiser and you together, Scott, so you guys can talk about the nuts and bolts of it. So we'll schedule something here pretty quickly. But personally, I wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
I know
you,
this
Keith.
takes a couple hours out of your day, so thank you very much.
Appreciate you having us.
You were A+. You were
Thank
A+.
you.
Seriously. This was
Thank
a
you,
lot of
Jerry.
fun. A lot of fun.
Yes, it was.
Thank you for setting up the roundtable.
What do you got, Alex?
Alex, yeah, in studio, talking finance. I love it.
And we've got I can't remember the date, but they're going to be coming on Real Talk to do a
Great.
roundtable. We'll talk this very subject.
I'm very excited for the show on Thursday as we have Albemarle County looking to unionize a lot of team members and employees, and it's leadership in the school division in the studio. That'll be something that'll be all over the news. So we'll close on this. This is Real Talk, presented by Yes Realty Partners, presented by Ross Mortgage,
Thank you.
presented by Interstate Pest Control, Charlottesville Settlement Company, Keller Williams Alliance, American Pest, Pearl Certification, Shenandoah Joe's, and Dave Fafara. Guys, thank you, Dairy Market.
Dairy Market. Taking my mother out there on Friday for her birthday.
And Dairy
Mom's
Market.
going to be 79. I'm taking Mom out
Happy birthday, Tina.
Taking Mom out.
Happy birthday, Mrs. Smith. Yeah, 79 years young.
Nobody else but me and my mom. And we're going for ice cream.
Oh, a little move through
Nice.
for
A little
Mrs.
move
Smith.
through. Looking forward to
That's
it.
going to be very nice. Thank you for joining us, guys. We certainly appreciate your viewership and your listenership. You guys have a good morning. We will see you in approximately 50 minutes on the I Love Seville show. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Seriously,
Thank
that
you.
was so much
Thank you.
fun.
Thank you.
You had rapid fire questions.